In 2021, the International Maritime Organization, together with the Women's International Shipping and Trading Association, or WISTA, launched a survey to collect some hard data on female representation in the global maritime industry. The second edition of that survey was published last week to coincide with International Women in Maritime Day, which is celebrated on May 18th. But the results were hardly cause for celebration, because while some progress has been made in terms of gender diversity in the maritime industry, the data in the 2024 edition suggests shipping is going backwards. My name is Joshua Minchin, I'm a reporter here at Lloyd's List, and it's time to take a difficult look at ourselves as a sector and ask why the proportion of women in the industry has actually fallen since 2021. The results of the 2024 edition showed 176,820 women working in the maritime industry across both private and public sectors. That's an increase of 14% from the 151,979 recorded in 2021. But despite the increase in the numbers itself, the global maritime workforce has grown considerably since the last survey, which means women now account for just under 19% of the workforce sampled versus 26% in 2021. Female employees make up just over 16% of the workforce in the private sector, compared to 29% recorded in 2021. Plus, a drop was also seen in female representation in mid-management positions, declining to just 20% in 2024 from 39% in 2021. I asked Elpi Petraki, president of WISTA International, how she felt about the results.
I was hoping for much better results. I would say much higher numbers on women in across the sectors and in the member states and in the industry. We have positive things, but we also have some negative. We are not sure if this is the real reflection of the industry, because not everyone in the industry or the member states has replied, but there is some truth in there. There's a lot of truth in there. And it means we have a lot of work to still do. And we need to understand what the barriers are. And the only way to do that is by having a look at the numbers, all of us. I think an important positive thing in the industry results is a higher percentage of women in leadership positions, and which I think is a huge change before. And we've seen that this has a close relation to how we translate in policies within the companies. So I think this indicates what we've always go out and say: we need women to be in leadership roles, because then the changes will happen in all the other levels.
Louise Proctor, who is the Deputy Director of Planning and Programming in the Technical Cooperation Division of the IMO, said there were pockets of good news in the data.
The thing that pleased me, I'll start with, was the fact that there was an increase from 14 to 21% of females in the member administrations. And I think that that represents a positive impact of the change and the initiatives that we have been focused on in the last few years. What was more concerning was that women still only make up 1% of the surveyed seafarer workforce, and I think that represents a real challenge that needs to be addressed. And also the fact that we're seeing a higher number of women being educated in maritime, but not necessarily then translating into the workforce. So there are quite not significant, but positive indications of women being trained. But then this issue of what we call the leaky pipeline is coming in, and we're not seeing that same level of trained women working in seafaring roles at sea and then also onshore roles.
Let's not pretend otherwise, though. The results of the 2024 survey make for depressing reading. Yes, there are some green shoots of optimism, but the direction of travel isn't forwards. The wider political landscape does nothing to assuage any fears that shipping is going backwards either. Just hours after his inauguration, President Trump signed an executive order entitled Ending Radical and Wasteful Government's DEI Programs and Preferencing. The message could not have been any clearer from the US, but in Europe too, parties with what could generously be described as socially conservative agendas have seen great success in the last couple of years. Here's LP again to explain how she has seen the winds changing recently.
You don't catch me in a very positive day. I have this frustration in me, and maybe we'll go that way as well. But I think we shouldn't be explaining the obvious things again and again. And I am still into conversations, and because you asked me earlier on if the changes people see around the world is affecting us, I've come these past months many more times in conversations with men in their mid life, let's say above 50, trying to explain to them why women have to be in the maritime. Seriously, this is frustrating for me now. We are going back to again 50 years ago when Vista was established. Why women are suitable for vessels, why women are suitable for boards, for leadership, why people don't understand that this is important. I think because they are hearing voices that are telling them that women should be at home. Women should be at home taking care of the families only. And this is a conversation I thought we had finished 70 years ago. These talks coming from a very powerful part of the world, it definitely affects others. However, I think it's the time for all of those who still believe in this to show more work, more persistence, and maybe it's a good time for all of us to reflect on what we have been doing. Maybe we pushed things the wrong way. It can happen. And I think we need to reflect and adjust our way forward. And we need to support the ones who don't have voices. And I think now more than ever. Sometimes I'm thinking that we're returning back to 30 years ago, when these discussions were not freely out there. And people, they come from different places, maybe they're afraid to talk about it. Or maybe they will feel stronger about it. So we'll take the positive and try to make the change.
Perhaps the reason this set of results is particularly disappointing is the fact that attention on female representation and gender diversity has arguably never been higher, yet still the industry can't boast about any significant progress. Here's Louise again.
I think it becomes frustrating because we talk so much about it. There's a lot of progress in terms. I talked about the three pillars: visibility, training, and recognition. There has been a lot of progress in that visibility space to raise awareness of the issues. But one of the things that actually LP mentioned was in terms of visibility is creating those male allies and getting them to facilitate change as well. But it's not just about visibility. We then need to translate that into training, because that's what gives women the skills and the opportunities to step into any level of roles, but particularly senior leadership positions as well. And then it's really about the recognition and highlighting the contribution that women make to the maritime industry. I think that in terms of growing tired of it, I just wish that people would recognize that it's not just about talking about it. It actually requires investment to be able to progress with some meaningful initiatives. There's a lot of policies to make as well in terms of inclusion and institutional level change. And I think that those things don't necessarily need investment. Member states can progress those initiatives without, significant investment as well. So it's a combination of approaches.
LP and Louise's frustration is audible. LP is having to have conversations that, as she said, she thought we had left behind long ago. But Heidi Hesseltine, who is founder and CEO of the Diversity Study Group and shipping industry veteran, said that diversity, equity and inclusion might just need a slight rethink, rather than being thrown out as a concept completely.
I think that in the US, of course, there's been significant change and significant impact on a large number of people. I think that outside of that administration in particular, we haven't heard much noise in a negative way, if you like. And I think that, yes, there are changes in all parts of the world. I mean, the world is so fast changing at the moment. But we've not seen a major rollback on DEI at all, on focus for DEI or on policies in maritime companies. And actually, we published a thought paper back in March where we took a few months to actually look at the impact that all of the, everything that's happening around the world was having on DEI, and specifically on DEI and maritime. And what we found, and were really encouraged by, was that most organisations were in fact doubling down on their position, and particularly on inclusion, which is of course a crucial component in successful and attractive businesses. And what we were talking about actually during that, within that thought paper, for maritime leaders, we're saying, look, following these political shifts, what can you do? Well, actually, what's crucial is you revisit your DEI strategies. So take time to pause and revisit in the same way you would any business strategy to ensure it's relevant, it's effective, and you adapt where you need to. We also recognise that there's been a shift in language, and organisations do need to recognise that too. Some politically charged language, like diversity at the moment, has been moved away from in favour of a focus on belonging or inclusion in particular. And the other thing that we very much are advising maritime leaders to look at is to use a data-driven approach to assess actually what is going on at the moment, because data actually cuts the politics out, and it removes politics, it removes emotion, so you can focus on what's actually going on.
Speaking of reframing, there is a self-fulfilling prophecy aspect to this conversation too. Is there a risk that, by repeatedly and loudly explaining how male-dominated and unsuitable for women shipping is, we make it much harder to attract female talent? Here's Heidi again.
There hasn't been any conversations I've had around this for the last 4 or 5 years where we haven't said, as an industry, we need to tell our story better if we want to attract more diversity, whatever form that takes, into the sector. We are not good at storytelling, first and foremost. I think that's absolutely crucial for us to understand. So yes, the more we can talk about the positive stories, as well as the other ones that need to matter, the more we're representing ourselves as an industry that is more attractive. And there are some really, really positive stories to tell out there, make no mistake. So yes, I think collectively it's our responsibility to try and do that.
The report from last year's survey said the maritime industry is at a critical juncture when it comes to gender diversity. And it is hard to disagree with that when you take into account the wider social context we spoke about earlier, as well as the survey's results. I asked LP and Louise whether they agreed that this was a real fork in the road for shipping.
I think it is a critical juncture. I think that, again, with the political landscape and with the issues that we're still seeing in the results of this report, it's a collective responsibility to ensure that shipping doesn't just adapt, but it thrives. And there is a risk that if we don't make the change now, that this gap is going to widen. We're seeing some results that have regressed, and if we don't do something about it now, then this could just get worse and the gap could widen. So it is a critical juncture, and I think that there's enough momentum to take this forward if we've got the right people leading the change.
The maritime industry and the world are in a junction. We have so many goals we need to achieve, especially environmental goals. For the sustainability of our industry, other industries, our planets. And I think it's now that we have to make the decision if we include everybody in this change and the changes that will happen or not. So yes, it is a very critical junction we are at, and I think it's about time we take responsibility and we do more than talk and have some actions.
So which path will shipping take? Forwards towards a more modern and progressive industry that maximises the talent available to it, or backwards to a world where access to opportunities are decided on your gender rather than your aptitude? Here's Heidi again to offer a bit of hope as well as stress why shipping really must start moving forwards on this.
Firstly, no, I don't see that this is a sure sign of a retreat. I think, as I said earlier, it's progress isn't always linear. We've seen that when we were working with organisations, actually on increasing gender representation in particular. What we saw was that, and what we see quite often is that you can make some really good progress and then it either levels off, sometimes it goes into decline, and COVID had an impact on that, for example. But actually then you see that it can start picking up again. So I don't see this as a retreat at the moment, but it's certainly something that the industry needs to be taking seriously. And I think if we saw a longer term retreat, I think what would it spell for the industry? It would be a huge and unnecessary backward step. I think it would, where the industry has been quite verbal and outspoken in being behind DEI. I think it would, for many people in the industry, make them query any levels of trust that have been built. If we can't trust you on this, what else can we not trust you on? So I think trust is a huge part of this. And I think we don't want to see any knee-jerk reactions without fully taking stock and analysing with those data-led insights, because that allows current DI initiatives that have benefited organisations, whether it's recruitment, employee retention, well-being, you name it, you can really start having a look at the positive outcomes they're having. And we're seeing really positive results. So if you take, for example, last year, our annual DI and Maritime Review, so that was 2024 as well. If you look at, we ran 2 surveys. We do these each year, a seafaring survey, which we launched for the first time last year, and a shore-based employee survey, which we've now done for 5 years. If you looked at the shore-based survey figures, we identified that actually something simple like personal development conversations with managers, so that inclusive approach, had a massive impact on people's feelings about being able to be themselves at work. So that was at 87% for people who'd had those conversations compared to 66% who'd not. And also on their ability to be able to speak up, which was at 58% for those who had not had the conversation with their line manager, compared to 84% to those who had. So we could see a massive impact there. And then we looked at the seafarers. And when we looked at the impact of DEI training, those who had not had DEI training, they were 25% more likely to have experienced sexual harassment, 67% more likely to have felt psychologically harassed, and more than twice as likely to have felt discriminated against. So the data that we're getting and that we're using and investigating more each year is showing us that this body of work is having a good impact. And when you have an inclusive culture, it lends itself well to the diversity. So I think as we continue to see this work being done, it naturally lends itself to the outcomes we're all wanting to achieve. But obviously it takes intent and action, and it doesn't happen in a vacuum.
And that's where we're going to leave things this week. If you want to read more about the results from last year's IMO WISTA survey, then do head to lloydslist.com. Our thanks, of course, go to LP Louise and Heidi for their insights and their honesty. And of course, thank you to you for listening. We'll be back next week for more of the stories shaping shipping, but if you can't wait until then, the entire Lloyd's List back catalogue is available on SoundCloud, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, as well as the Lloyd's List app. Thanks again for listening, and we'll speak to you next week. Goodbye.